sample, basic components using hello world or some other components. And also we looked at the concepts like props, state, so props versus state. And also we looked at the component life cycle, so which is the basic important as part of the class components. And also we looked at the event handling. So as part of today's session, so before going to that, so if anyone missed the first session, probably you guys can go through that recording session, so that you would be familiar with those basic concepts. And before starting, so myself, I'm Keshav, and have been working as a technical manager and working as a freelance consultant. So basically, I have been working on Microsoft technologies like .NET, SQL Server, Azure, SQL BI, and recently started working on Power Platform as well. And along with this, I also worked on Angular.js, Knockout.js, and React.JS, and other JS frameworks, and libraries or frameworks. So in today's session, I'm going to cover this. Like, I just want to revisit that event handling, as we had some confusion. Some confusion when I tried to invoke the event handlers with same name. So that's why I just want to revisit that concept. And then I will go through the other concepts like pure components, refs, and passing data between components. So this is the most important concept when it comes to developing any project. So we might run into many times we might run into scenarios like developing master detail forms. So there we have to pass the data between a parent component and child component, and conditional rendering and list and case. So this is one more important concept. So when it comes to master components, where we might be listing down all the data as form of tables or list, something like that. And also React fragments and form handling. So form handling, so this is the basic concept where we collect the data as part of HTML forms and we submit that data to the server. So where we are using the forms, so how we handle this in React. So these are the concepts that I'm going to cover today. And yeah, let's start. So the event handling. So when it comes to events, so when it comes to any web application, events like clicking something and focusing on something, or and moving mouse, or focusing, lost focus, or on change. So these are all different kinds of events. So where we have to handle different kinds of events for either functional implementations, or might be some kind of CSS changes, or kind of UI changes by binding the displaying different CSS classes for different events. So when it comes to event handling in React.js, as I mentioned even in the last session, we have four types of, we can handle, or we can bind the event handlers to event in four ways. So these are all, basically React.js is suggesting one way, but there are two good ways, but the rest of the two ways, you can bind, those will work, but there are some drawbacks. So because of that reason, we prefer to go with only a couple of approaches. So let us look into all these approaches and see why we prefer only some, and why don't we prefer some, those. So among these, the first one is binding the event handler in the render method. So assume that I have a component, and in the component I have a render method. In that render method, assume I am displaying some button, with click me as button text. So I want to handle that button event handler. So there I can define a method, and from there I can just bind that method and pass that this parameter. This basically is the context. So referring to that class. So let us look into this example, and then we will see why whether we prefer this approach or we don't prefer this approach. So if we don't prefer, so what could be the reason? So we will look into it. So basically, when it comes to components, I mean, as I mentioned, we have class functional components and class components. So I just implemented one simple functional component here for event handling. So it is pretty much simple, like importing that React class from that library, and then defining a method click function, and in that click function I have some JSX where I'm displaying just a button with button text as login, and I am using, I mean, I want to handle the click event in login handler. So the login handler is not at all not doing anything here. It is just logging some message in the console, and just I'm exporting that. And after that, I'm just using this click function. So I already, I mean, ran this in order to ensure that we don't lose, I mean, much time for running all this to, I mean, effectively using that time. So I just want to clear this, and I just want to click this button. So here I can see I'm able to see this method, I mean, text, whatever I log. So as long as I click it, I mean, I can see all this. So the important point that we have to note down here is we are just binding that method to the event handler. It's not a method call, just binding that method only. Suppose say if I go ahead and make it as a method call, probably, I mean, we see some unprecedented behavior there. So the first thing is the method call is happening while rendering that method. You can see here. So the text is displayed as soon as I refresh it. So that means the method call is happened. And another, I mean, bad and unexpected thing is even if I click on that login button, the event handler is not getting executed. So that is one more issue that we have to note down. So the thing is, so because of that reason, while doing any, I mean, event handling, we have to just bind that method only. We don't need to make it as a method call. So that's the difference. So this is the just, I mean, I just implemented one functional components just to, I mean, demonstrate, I mean, how to handle those events. I mean, event handling in the functional hand. So let's look into a class, and in that we will see all the different event handling mechanisms. So, I mean, I have already implemented the, I mean, code for this. So here I mean, importing the React and component class, and I mean, implementing one class like click class option. Click class, I'm just mentioning as an option one, and which is extended from the component base class. I'm defining a constructor, and in the constructor, I'm defining a state with one attribute name as user and the value as guest. So basically, I just want to implement a simple functionality like I'm displaying a text, hi, and a username. By default, username is as guest, and displaying a login button. So as soon as user clicks on that login button, I just want to do some functionality. I mean, making a collecting the username, and I mean, I don't want to display all those things. So I'm just hard coding that username as text. I want to display as username hi text, hi username. So that's just simple functionality, and I mean generally we are all aware of that functionality. So I just want to implement it. So here I have this event handler. So it's just a method, and in that I'm just logging one. I mean some text, and then logging the this attribute as well. And also I'm setting this. I mean changing that state. In that state, I'm setting the user as text. So these are all common even for the rest of these four. I mean other ways where we can handle the events differently. But the main thing is here I am binding that event handler in the render method and passing that this parameter to that event. So this is the main thing. If you don't pass this from here to there, I mean, the method is not aware of this. That means it is not in this context, class context. So it is not aware of all this class, what the class has, what are the methods, or what are the, I mean, other attributes, even like states and props. So you would, you do, I mean, you don't expect that this is available in that method. So these are the thing, and let me comment out this and then enable this. So once it is done, yeah, let's look into this. So as I mentioned, by default I'm displaying user as guest, and as soon as I click a login, I can see the username change it to text, and also I'm able to see that login, like the text whatever I have, and also I can see all the data here. So here I can see the state and props and even the context and other attributes. So this is the first way of event handling. If you have any simple components, like I mean whatever we have like this, but when it comes to I mean generally when it comes to any I mean applications, so we might be having more complex scenarios, more complex business scenarios that we handle. So if the component is being re-rendered or rendered many times during the life, I mean during that function or whatever it is. So where that binding is happening every time whenever the component is rendered. So this generally is having some kind of performance issues. If the component is having less event handlers or less bindings, then it would be good. But if you have more and more, then it is going to create some kind of performance issues. So that's a kind of advanced topic where you can use performance tools to track this. So because of that reason, this method of event handling is not preferable. So yeah. Let us look into the another approach. So the basically I just want to, I mean I just implemented the same functionality and you can find the same code, but only the difference is in this event handling. So I just want to focus on this. I don't want to focus on, I mean I don't want to walk through all the code for these four scenarios. This is the second thing. The second way of doing it is binding that I mean arrow function basically. So while doing that, an arrow function is something like that starts with some kind of parameters, and then we have this arrow equals a greater sign, and then we are binding this event handler. I mean whatever the method where we want to bind, we want to handle that event. So here you can see the difference. Here we are using that parenthesis actually. So these are all small differences, but syntactic differences that causes a lot of issues, and those would eat. I mean, those kind of issues would eat a lot of developers' time while doing that real-time development. Sometimes we might not have, I mean, recognize our own mistakes. So because of the reason, and just stressing that point, so here we have to have those parentheses. So let me comment out this and then run this. So this is the same thing. And by default, I have a guest as user, and as soon as I click on login, the guest is changed to text, and I can see that I'm in logging and the rest of the things and whatever the data as part of that. This. So this is the second thing, but this is also not preferable. So the basic reason here is the event handling. I mean, how we are binding the event handler from the event. So basically, when it comes to arrow functions, while binding it, React would generate some dynamic name internally to bind that event handler to this event. As that name is generated dynamically for each render, so it has to bind every time a new method, and because of that reason, the binding is a burden for every re-rendering. So, and hence it is not also a preferable way to bind this. Bind. I mean, if it is a small component, as I mentioned, I mean, it won't create any issues. I mean, it works perfectly fine, and we can use that one as well. And this is the third method where React documentation suggests to use this. So the difference is we are defining an event handler and we are binding that event handler to some attribute or name as part of this constructor by using that bind method and passing this parameter. And the rest of the thing is same. And here non-click, we are just binding this dot login event. So this is, I mean, the perfect way to bind the event handlers. As while rendering that component, the constructor only calls as part of that mounting process, and it calls only once. So that means this binding is happens only once. So though you have n number of event handlers as a part of one, I mean, component, those bindings would happens once, and those are going to be reused for different, I mean, for re-rendering subsequent times. So because of that reason, this is the preferable way, and this gives the best performance, and it won't create any performance issues even the component is complex. So the functionality is same, and I mean there won't be any difference. And there is one more way for doing the same, like, so this is also the same like event handler, but the login event handler here I defined as an arrow function. So, the difference between the second method and fourth method is, in the second method, while binding it, I make it as an arrow function. But in the fourth method, while defining the I mean, event handler, I make it as a, I mean, arrow function. Here, I'm assigned to that arrow function to a name. So because of that reason, I have that name, and it is defined once during that life cycle of that component, and I am binding that login event handler to that event, and hence this definition is happens only once. This is just an assignment to happens while rendering it. So this is similar to the third method where the binding won't happen while re-rendering. So because of that reason, this method is also a preferable one, and it gives the best performance. So I mean, when it comes to functionality, I mean, it behaves the same. Probably, I mean, just run it once. And if you guys, I mean, the code, source code is shared to all of you guys, and the link is shared to you. And you guys can just run it in your local, get the source code and run it in the local, and you can do further, I mean, whatever you want to do on top of them. So it's the same thing, I mean, same functionality that you may have. So that's about the event handling basically. So I just want to revisit this event handling. So basically, I just want to, I mean, go through all these types. The first method we are binding that event handler as part of that render method with where the event handler is binding to that event using that bind method and passing that this parameter. So this is not preferable because the binding is happening every time when a component re-renders. The second way is using arrow function, and the arrow function is binded to that event handler in the render method. So as it is happening in the render method, whenever the rendering of that component happens, this binding is going to happen. So because of that reason, it won't be a preferable one. So this is the preferable one where we are binding that event handler to a method, I mean to a property or attribute as part of that constructor. This is the preferable one. Or defining an arrow function and assign it to a name as part of that class and doing just a mapping to this event handler. So this is the another way. So either 3 or 4 are preferable ones, and you can use those methods as part of I mean your binding, I mean event handling. Even 1 or 2, I mean fine if it is simple component, but 3 or 4 are more preferable ones are the best practices that we can go with. Yeah, that's about event handling. I just want to I mean make it clear. And yeah, the next thing is pure components. So this is one of the more important concept. So generally when it comes to a component, we are generally inheriting from a base class called component class. Instead of this, we can inherit even from the pure component as well. I mean, probably you won't see any difference here. Let me run the same. So this is the component that I'm having, and the functionality that I just implemented is when I click on it, I mean, the name is changed. It's pretty much simple. So the only difference, what is the difference between that, in that case, pure component and component? So pure component is also a component, but it implemented one method, one lifecycle method. So that lifecycle method is should component update. So this should component update method is part of that updating lifecycle, and it gets executed before rendering the component. So by default, component method, I mean component class renders, I mean returns this method value as true. So that means there is some change in the state or props, and hence the component should be re-rendered. If it returns false, it won't re-render that component again, even though there are some changes to the props or state. So that is the basic behavior of the lifecycle methods. So this pure component would implement this should component update, and in that should component update method, it will it will do a shallow comparison of the state of the previous state with the current state, and also the previous props with the current props. And if there are any differences, then it will re-render the component. If there won't be any differences, then it won't re-render that component. Suppose say, I mean, we can take one example like maybe, I mean, I have a list of data displaying as part of the table, and I'm something like I am assume that I have some kind of sorting functionality on top of some of those columns. Assume that the sorting is only happens within the data that is displayed as part of that. And also you might be having some other component where we are displaying some kind of summaries, might be total number of rows or total number of value or sales, whatever it is. And when I sort the data, you don't need to, I mean, those count or values won't change, that sales won't change, but it is just reordering the data only. So in that case, you don't need to re-render that summary component. So in that scenario, instead of inheriting it from component class, if you can easily, I mean, you can inherit from pure component class, where, I mean, you can keep the same data, and as the data won't be changed, yes, obviously it won't be re-rendered. So these are all the some kind of advanced topics where you can design your components in efficient manner in order to get the best performance from those applications, especially when you are doing web I mean, apps. Might be when you have less memory, or kind of, I mean, where I mean, the data transfers are, all these are constraints. Like, I mean, you've been having less memory, less process speed on, I mean, these, I mean, mobiles or apps. So that is the advantage of that pure component. And I mean, the, when it comes to that pure component, the only difference is it implements that method. And if there is any difference between the previous props and current props, and or any difference between the previous state and current state, then only it re-renders. So here it is called a shallow comparison. And when it comes to the comparison of props with previous props or state with previous state, when the data is primitive data, it compares the values. And when it comes to the complex data, it compares the references. So that's why whenever you feel that the component should be re-rendered, even it is a pure component, it is better to create or copy the data into the, I mean, if you have a list, copy that list into the new list and assign it to the, I mean, state, so that it treats that there is some data change, and then it again re-renders. So that's a design decision, and I mean, implementation decision. It purely depends on the functionality that you would like to implement, and the other constraints like you have to consider. So that's about the pure components and the refs. So this is one of the most, this is also one of the big kind of, I don't say advanced concept, but it helps the applications to improve the performance drastically. So far all the, how React works is, we have the browser where we are executing that JavaScript. And on top of that JavaScript, we have another layer called this React.JS. And in that React.JS, we are actually managing that entire customer data. So suppose, say, if we take any example, so here we can, here we are managing that username. So we can directly manage that username in the label itself, or some other DOM element itself. But on top of the DOM element, we are managing the React class, and this React class is taking care of managing the data of the DOM components. And when it comes to submissions or all those things, we don't need to refer the DOM. We can directly use this, this component class, and we can get that data easily. So that is the advantage of this framework. So the thing is, we have the browser. On top of that, the browser, we are executing that JavaScript. On top of it, we have this React.js framework. This React.js framework is handling all the complexity and making our life easier. But the thing is, whenever we want to make some kind of operations on top of on the DOM elements directly, so here we can't do that directly because we have just data only. We don't have any components or DOM elements here. But if you want to do any operations on DOM elements, so these refs are useful. So let's take a look into one example. Then so the best, or how I can say, is a good example is, suppose, say, I have a, yeah, assume that I have one, what it is, some text box, and in that text box, I'm just typing some data, and when I submit that value, and I want to focus, I mean, not submission that. As soon as that component is rendered, I just want to get that focus into that text box. So where I want to do it from a React component. So here in this scenario, the refs are useful. So it is pretty much simple to create the ref. It is just creating, I mean, using this React and using this method create ref, and taking the reference into some input ref. And then once it is done, it is just I have this input element here, and in that input element, I'm just referencing, I mean, I'm passing that we have one attribute called ref, and I'm passing that this dot ref, and I have that this dot ref as react dot creator, which is already created. So this is the same I mean simple functionality I just want to implement. And yep, the missing point I just want to go back to this focus, getting that focus. Yep, I'm going to that. So going to that focus. So here I'm defining sorry, not this one. So I'm focusing into that text box by just I mean, I'm using that one method, lifecycle method, component did mount. So this component did mount will get executed after rendering that as part of that mount lifecycle. So as part of this, I can use that ref and this dot ref dot current, and this is referring to that DOM element of that input element, and I'm just using that focus method to get it to that focus. Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, this button event handler, I'm just extracting that value from that input ref element. So I just want to show you guys that I can access that DOM element value directly from that DOM element rather than from this state. So here I'm accessing the DOM element directly. So I just want to display that one only. I show that one to you. So because of that reason, I am just displaying, I mean, displaying one button. And when I click that button, I'm extracting that value from that DOM element. So that's one thing. And this is one thing, and one more thing. I will come back to this once I demo this. Let me comment out this and then go to the refs demo. Okay. So let me refresh it, ensure that, yeah. So as soon as I click it, you can see the focus is in the text box. So this is because of this method. Suppose say if I comment out this, if I come back and refresh it, the focus won't happen here. So the thing is how basically refs allow. Yeah, please go ahead if you have any questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So what are the other ways to focus on a text box instead of doing this dot input ref dot current dot focus?
Other ways means?
Means can we use jQuery or JavaScript function to get the focus?
Yeah, that's the obvious thing. Basically this React is also some kind of JavaScript. I mean, though it is some kind of a library, it is a JavaScript. I mean, pure JavaScript code only. But what it does is, instead of writing, lines and lines of code in even JavaScript and jQuery, this React frameworks will make our life easier. So if you rather than going through that all that, headache with JS. So that is the basic. I mean, objective of all these JavaScript frameworks or JavaScript libraries. So, I mean, simply say you can do anything in the JavaScript. Why we are going for Java jQuery, where you can access those elements and doing all these operations easily than JavaScript. So, because of that reason, we go with React.JS, jQuery. And when it comes to these other frameworks like either Knockout.js or React.js or Angular.js, so these are all the frameworks, and those are the advanced, even jQuery, and this would make even our life easier than jQuery. But you can do all these things in jQuery as well, even JavaScript as well.
Okay, got it, sir.
So that is the difference. So if I comment out this, the sprockets won't happen. And also the one more thing, let me refresh. So get value. Here you can see I'm displaying this get value and the alert. So if you look at this, so here I am accessing that value from the DOM element directly. Okay, directly from the DOM element using this dot, that reference dot current dot value. So this gives us another way of accessing the data which is available in the DOM elements. Or, and this is on top of it, you can use the state as well to get that value. Okay. There is one more thing I just want to demo it. So here the thing is how we want to use the state instead of accessing that DOM directly to get the value. So here I'm just displaying a text element, and here I'm binding that value to input value, which is part of that state. And then this reference is only for getting that focus, not nothing more than that. Even I can delete it, I don't mind, but I just want to show you the way how we can access that values, the same value through using that state. And here the thing is, as soon as the value is changed in the text box, I am binding one event handler, text change or input change event handler, and that input event handler is taking that value from that from that text box and changing the value in that input value. So if you see, here one more thing I just want to demo here is that console.log. So keep note of it. Cannot read property focus. Okay, let me, yeah. As I removed that reference, it gave that error, not more, nothing more than that. Here I'm not focusing on that ref. I want to demo. So I just want to remove it. So you can identify, this render method is going to execute for every state change or prop change. So here I am changing that render. When I type it, when I change, enter something or type something, what happens is that on change event will raised. And as soon as on change event is raised, and I'm changing that state with the value from that input element. And because of that reason, this is getting executed repeatedly. You can see. So this is a simple component. You have one text box and one button where I am typing something, and this component is rendered these many times. Assume that if you have a complex component, especially which is might be part of some app where it is getting executed in a small mobile where it has its less memory and less other things. So you can assume that complexity or the issues that you may run into when it comes to execution, like performance issues or other things. So because of that reason, pure components and other things or event bundling, we should be more careful while designing our components. So if you click here, I'm getting that value, and this value is coming from that state. So this is the advantage of this, I'm in React. So that's what I just want to show you, the difference. So because of that reason, instead of going in this route, I prefer to go in this route to define the components or elements and taking the refs and using those refs to do the operations or getting the values from the DOM elements in order to get the best performance of those components especially. So that's about refs basically. So that is the difference between ref and the basic usages of the ref. So refs are used to access these DAM elements directly in React, and you can create that ref by just using the react.createRef method and assign it to that ref attribute as part of that element. You can assign to any attribute. Those are all things. You can use the current attribute, property to access the DOM element basically. So that's about the refs. And then, yeah, okay. Passing the data between components. Yeah, this is the most important topic, as I mentioned as part of that introduction as well. So basically, when it comes to applications, those might be web applications or apps, the master detail data relationships are quite common, where we have to display the master data and child data. And it's quite normal scenarios where you have to pass the data between parent component to the child component, and also from the child component to the parent component. So we would see, how to pass this from parent to child and child to parent. Okay, assume that I have one, what it is, one master component, and also I have one child component. So the basic functionality that I just want to implement is, let us go through this. Child component, it has nothing, importing those base classes. Child component extended from component, and in the render method, it's a simple method. And here, uh, yep, here it's basically two things. Let me go through first from passing the data from master component to child component, and then we will go to the second part. Okay, so this is the simple one, and here it's pretty much simple. I have one button, and in that button I'm just displaying label as child, and here the event handler for this button, on click event handler for this button, instead of defining that here, I defined that in the master component and passing that event handler. You can say all these things are like defining that event handler and binding that event handler. And once it is bind, I just used one attribute, like basically I'm just passing it as a props to the child component. And in the child component, I'm accessing it as using this dot props dot button event. That's it. So basically, when I want to pass some data, that could be anything, either some data related to some, I mean, business or some event handlers or whatever it is. You can use props to pass the data from master to child. So that's the basic thing. So here I have master component. Let me uncomment it. Let me go and run it. So you can see the lab, I mean the whatever it is. As part of this master component, I just I mean logging something. Button click event handler from master. So as many times as I click, I can see this many times it is being logged. So that's the way. So if it is something like some business object, you can pass this business object, like me might be some customer name or customer data, customer object, or whatever is it. It could be simple primitive data to complex data. You can use some props. I mean, you can bind it to some props object. I mean, props. Um, I mean, attribute, and that can be used. That can be accessed here by using this dot props. So that is the simple thing. So that is the way you can pass from master to detail using props. And how about passing some data from props to, I mean, child component to master component? So you can see the same thing, but instead of that event handler, it is accepting some objects. Yeah, I mean, here it could be a simple primitive object like string name. I'm just passing child name from the child component, but it can be anything. Instead of child name, from here you can pass a complex object. But the thing, only the difference is here it is a direct, straightforward, simple mapping. But here, instead of simple mapping, you are using an arrow function, and through that arrow function, I'm passing this parameter name. So that is the only difference. So while right, let me save it again. Yeah. So the thing is, now I can go ahead and execute it, and you can see the parameter name from child component to the master component is being passed from here. So it can be not, I mean, I'm using, if I change it, probably it's some testing, it should be reflected there. So it might not be a simple property, it can be a complex object as well. So I mean, as it is, I mean, it's just a sample to understand the concept. I'm just passing that simple attribute name. But when it comes to business applications, you might have to pass some complex objects. Suppose say when you are adding a child component, adding some, I mean, suppose say you are some kind of sales orders, you are adding a new sales order, collecting all the data, and once everything is done, if the data, I mean, the logic is implemented in the master component to make those service calls, there you have to pass that entire service order data that you collected from the end user. You have to pass it from the child component to this master component, where you can pass the, I mean, get that data and send that to services. So these are these different scenarios or complex scenarios that you may come across as part of the as part of your applications, I mean, application development. So this is the way where you have to pass the data from master to child, and also from child to master. So that's it. That's about the passing the data. So you can use props to pass from parent to child, and when it comes to child, you can pass just as a parameter to that event. Okay. Okay. So any questions till now? And it has been 45 minutes, and I would like to have some quick 5 minutes break to refresh yourself, and then it's 12:25. We will resume at 12:30, and I will be available. And if you guys have any questions, and you can ask them. I'm here to answer your questions. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Welcome back. And then um, okay. Conditional rendering. So basically conditional rendering. So far all the components, and as part of that render method, we are having some kind of simple JSX and their own, I mean, those are all straightforward. So far we haven't used any, I mean, complex scenarios or kind of conditions or conditional based rendering. So when it comes to the real-time applications, I mean, the functionality might not be this much um, simple, where you might be having some, I mean, complex business scenarios where you have to implement, and you might run based on some conditions or some different scenarios or whatever it is. So it might not be a straightforward one. So there you might be rendering the component based on different scenarios. So let's take one simple scenario. So I have one logging component I implemented. So as part of this component, so I'm managing one attribute called is logged in user. I mean, use user logged in. If user is logged in, by default, user is not logged in. And I'm displaying one button. And once user clicks on that button, I'm assuming that the user is logged in. And when user is logged in, I'm just displaying name as test user, or by default I'm displaying it as a guest user. So let's run this, and then we will see how we'll walk through that. So this is the simple component. So by default I'm displaying welcome guest, and as soon as I click it and displaying some username, could be test user for now, and it can be anything, whoever is logged in. So by basically we have to correct the username and password. There you have to make a service call and validate that user credentials, and once user is logged in, get the user details and then display that username. So that's what the basic behavior. But here instead of doing all these things, we just simply make it as uh, just make demo purpose, just displaying this one. So guest and then test user. So here by default the user logged in is false, and here we are returning it. Basically I'm using if else. If some condition where if it is true I am rendering something, if not true I am rendering something else. So if user logged in, I'm just displaying it as test user, and not else I'm displaying it as a guest. The only problem here is the repetition of this, I mean, JSX code. Here I'm typing that twice, and I mean, increases the size of that code as well, size of the source code as well. So the other way that I can go with is, so the one more way is I can take some variable, and using that variable I can use that variable as part of the JSX. So this is much more simpler. So here I'm taking one user variable, and by default I'm assigning to guest, and if user is logged in I'm making it as a test user, and I'm using that username as part of this binding, and this is normal button which is being used to get that button click event. So by default guest, and once I change it, test user. So this is another way you can take some variable. So I feel this is the better approach to handle these kind of scenarios. And the other way is you can use the ternary operator. So ternary operator is something like a simple form of if else. So you can check some condition. If it is true, then we are doing something. If it is false, then we are making some colon and doing something. So this is the basic functionality, and here guest and test user. these are the basically different ways that we can use. So among all these, I believe this would be the best approach when it comes to using real-time scenarios. I mean, this is the simple scenario where you are managing only one variable, but when it comes to, I mean, business scenarios, you might run into so many different things, different conditions, different business scenarios. So this is the best way where you can define variables for different things and handle the scenarios based on those conditions. So that's about the conditional rendering. And yeah, lists and keys. So this is pretty much a very important concept. We generally have to render so many things to so many business scenarios. In all those scenarios, we might have to list down the data. So where we have to display the data. So okay. Let me go ahead and comment this. So I have one simple requirement. I just implemented one simple requirement. So the requirement is I have list of names. I'm just displaying it as I'm just listing down as HT elements only. So basically here I'm using the map method of that array, and in that map array I can loop through all the elements where I'm displaying this element here. Simple, not so much complex. It is very easy to understand. So this is the simple listing down those elements. So here you can display, might be some kind of UI, UL, list down unordered list or even tables or whatever it is. You can list down all those things using this. But while doing this, if you actually observe this, we are getting some warning here saying like each child in a list should have a unique key property. So why React is doing that? So let us look into some theoretical concepts as well. So when it comes to listing down all the elements, suppose you have 1,000 items, 1,000 sales orders, and you have to display them in a page, and you display all them in a page. And whenever there is a minor change to any property or state, you have to re-render all those 1,000 items. It is going to be a very costly operation when it comes to UI application, especially and within an app. So because of that reason, React wants to make it more effective algorithm behind the screens and wants to, make it or implement it in the best way in order to re-render everything. If there is a small attribute or property changes to one item, why should we re-render all those 999 items? So for that reason, React basically came up with something and saying like we have to manage one key attribute for each of these items. The key attribute should be unique for all those items. And whenever there is a change in any one of those items, the React internally identifies using that key and only re-render the item that is changed and reuse all the other items that are already available by not re-rendering entire things. So that is the basic concept here with the keys. So let us look into this. So Assume that I have an employees list, employee ID, name, age, and skills. I'm displaying all of them in a table. And once the table is done, then I'm just displaying one button there, and whenever you add new item, I'm just refreshing it. So basically, let me uncomment it. Let's look into this. Yes, you can see here. So basically, yeah. So I just made it some enhancement or something like what it is, some refactoring and broken down into different components as well, in order to how better we can implement it. So here I'm displaying the table, and for displaying all the headers, I implemented another separate component, and this is going to be constant even if there is any change. So this can be a pure component. So that it won't be re-rendered again and again. And also I did implement one more child component, employee component. And in that employee component, I'm just passing that data. Where it is. Yeah. And you can see I'm just passing that employee data, and passing as a person, and this is being accessed using the props, and I'm taking into a variable, and I'm using that variable to display the name, age, and all this. And here you have to identify that I'm setting that key attribute with ID. So here ID is the primary key for my table or whatever it is. And this is going to be unique for all my employees. So because of that reason, I used it. Sometimes you can use the index as well. But if there won't be any changes or any deletions, it works perfectly fine. But if there are any deletions to that, then using index will create problems. Would render, the rendering won't have, the rendering will give some kind of unexpected results, not exactly the correct results what you expect. So because of that reason, it is always better to go with the primary keys or IDs. So this one thing. So here, when I execute it, right. So we don't find that error, or warning. So if we have it, if we set that key attribute, then it will work. So that is the advantage, usage and advantage of that key, and the pros and cons of that key using different types of keys. And also I just add one event handler, and here, yep, you can see, and as soon as I click it, I'm adding one more element. So here you can see I just hard coded, I believe. Yep, I just hard coded it to ID to 4. So it won't work again if I click it. It will give the error. But this is the, I mean, probably, you can change it to some other things. So here I'm concatenating to these employees, and employees is being reassigned to employees attribute as part of that state. So again, that re-rendering happens. As part of that re-rendering, the first 3 items are already available, so those won't be re-rendered. Only that 4th item is going to be re-rendered. So that is the advantage of using keys as part of these lists. So yeah, keys the special attributes that should get included while rendering the list. Key should be set while rendering the list, otherwise React will give some warning. Key should be unique in the list, ideally primary key, and you can use sometimes the index, but you have to be very much careful. You have to understand that complete business scenario, otherwise you would expect unexpected results. Key value cannot be re-rendered. So this is the most important attribute, and you cannot, the key is not available for you to render it. You have to use the ID only here. That is part of that business object, and this key is an internal object that can be used for internal purposes, and it won't be available for you. And key is also used in to identify modified items while updating the components. Yeah, that's what I mentioned, to get the best performance. Right. So that's about lists and keys. Okay, React fragments. So this is one more, I mean, a easy concept, but simple concept, but sometimes it is necessary. And in some scenarios, we have to use it. So let me go through this example employee list, and I would like to enable it. I mean, it doesn't have much. I mean, when it comes to functionality wise, I mean, it is straightforward. I have a list of employees. Yeah, it has a list of employees. I'm just displaying them in the table. Nothing more than that. But when it comes to the implementation, I mentioned as part of that first session saying like every render method should return one element only, one HTML element only. That can be HTML element or it can be a React element. If you try to use some another element, you would get errors. You won't compile, you would get compile time errors, not even runtime errors. So because of that reason, you have to have one element. Suppose say you can take some, like I have one table. So because of that reason only we are using the div. Suppose I have multiple elements, I'm putting all those things in the div and rendering them. So div is not some kind of div doesn't have any visibility in the HTML. So because of that reason we are using div. But suppose say when you are displaying some kind of a table and you are part of that table, so you can see here how I did it. Maybe you can take the header. So we have all these things, I mean table and table header as part of the tr, and as part of the tr I can't have any divs. I will be having only the tds. So if I go ahead and make it as div here, so I mean you can see this as part of, I mean some kind of table, but you can see the errors or warnings in the I mean console. So React won't accept this kind of things. Those won't. This will break the that HTML. So because of that reason, React.fragment is some kind of a dummy element which can be used to group them together and render it as a single element. So it won't have any significance. And even if you look at that, you inspect it. So this is what we have. So the TR does not have any element. So you can directly see those TDs. So that is the advantage of the React that fragment element. So instead of that React fragment, you can also simply render that empty one as well. You don't need to keep that much. I mean, keep anything. You can just keep empty tags as well. So the same thing is implemented as part of this data as well. So can be React.fragment or even empty elements. You can see the same behavior. So that is the advantage of React.fragments. So React.fragments are just used to group the elements and render it as a single element, as React won't allow us to render multiple elements. And so in some scenarios, you should not say any kind of elements like div to group them together and make it as a single element and return it, like table or UI element, UL. There might be some other scenarios as well. So where UI won't work. So because of that reason, you are using, we can go with React dot fragments or empty tags. Yeah. And before going to the other thing, I just want to demo one more thing, life cycle. The last session we discussed about the life cycle is basically 3 steps. One is mounting and updating and unmounting. When it comes to mounting, it has 4 life cycle methods. One is constructor, and the second one is create state from props, and the other one is render, and the next one is did component mount, component did mount. So these are the 4 life cycle methods, and these would get executed in the order, in the same order as I mentioned. So life cycle parent. So here I just want to show you this demo you one unexpected behavior. So that's why I just want to demo it. Okay. Okay. So I'm just rendering it. So here then comes to my component. I'm having a constructor and one state where I'm messaging some message hello, and I'm having one button, and when I click it saying it as thank you, and I'm logging in something mentioning like it is constructor and get derived state from props, and the other one is did component mount and the render. So these are all the methods that I have. I'm displaying the message and I'm also displaying that button there. But the thing is, I'm able to see them twice. Each one is twice, but this is the only ones. So I had to spend some time to identify the reason behind it and why it is rendering twice. Then finally, I came to know that this because of this reason, React.strict mode. So this is basically will be available in uh, development only, but in production it won't get executed in that way. But if you want to see the exact behavior, you can remove that tags, those tags here dot strict mode tags, and keep it as just app. And when you make those changes, and when you execute them, you would see them only once. Yeah. That's what, because of this reason only I just want to demo it. Probably when you go back and doing some hands-on things, probably you might see some unexpected behavior. So I just want to make a note of it. So just keep it in mind while doing it. And so these are all the things. And when I make a change, you can see get derived state from props and should component update, render, get snapshot before update. So this is where it gets the snapshot of the existing props and state, and those will be used when it comes to the next time. Props and state can be used for the comparison for the state at that point of time, state and props, and did component update. So these are all the life cycle method that we have. So no, there are nothing. I just mentioned. Keep some logs only, not more than that, nothing more than that. Just keep a note of it, like this one, this React.strict mode. So this is basically used to to see if the React components have any warnings or errors kind of stuff. So it will try to look into those components to see if there are any warnings or errors in those components. And then because of that reason, React internally executed this component twice. So because of that reason, we were able to see those. Okay. Yeah, that's about React lifecycle. And the last one that I want to demo is forms. So for this purpose, um, I'm just displaying some like something like username, age, and skills, some text boxes. I just want to collect this data and I just want to submit it. So that's what that is the simple behavior that I have. And you can see here I'm putting it to the form and username. And when it comes to the type, I'm managing the data in the React components, and because of that reason, I'm managing the attributes here. And whenever there is a change, I'm having those event handlers to get the data and assign it to the attributes so that the updated data would be available in the form. Otherwise, it won't be available. And the same is for age, and the same is for skill. And I have a submit button here, and add employee event handler. In the add employee event handler, I'm just displaying probably, when it comes to the business scenarios, we might be having some backend service calls, and there you add it to the backend, and once you get that result back, then you would be displaying. So at the same time, I'm having some, as soon as I submit it, the page is getting refreshed. So because of that reason, I'm just using that event.prevent default to break that submit behavior, to stop that submission of that form. So here I don't submit it. So here I can see some test is 20 and skills React.JS. And when I submit it, you can see the data I have. So this is pretty much simple. So otherwise, yeah, the other ways you can have refs for each of these components, and you can directly gather the data from those refs. That is another way to get the data, but that is a tedious thing. This is the simple thing. But in terms of getting the performance, that is the best way, because you can see console.log render. So assume that I have this, I'm entering the name, I'm entering the age, and I'm entering React.js. So you can see how many times this render method is called and how much execution is happening in the backend, behind the screens. You won't see all these things. But when you have good processor and good memory, then you will be fine. But when it comes to complex components, we have to be careful, especially while doing some kind of graphs or some kind of mouse focus, mouse in, mouse out of events. These kind of things, we have to be very much careful when you are managing those things as part of the state. So when you make a mouse move, those coordinates is going to be changed drastically, and this render is going to continuously rendering. So those would create performance issues. So should be very careful, and it does depends on the business scenarios. So this is another thing that I just want to demo you. Yeah, React fragments and then form handle. And yep. That's all I have for today. So do you guys have any questions? And you guys can send, if you guys have any feedback and if you want to share, you can use my email address, expertsittechsolutions@gmail.com. So I would definitely reply you back, might not be immediately, but I would definitely reply you back. uh, and if you guys have any feedback, you can share. And also if you guys have any questions or anything, you guys can share. uh, and you guys can send email to those email to that email. Yep, that's all I have. So any guys, any questions, anything you want?
I have a question.
Sure.
In one of the first examples, where you press the button and you set the value using set state. So
Right.
does that value exist between components or other forms? For example, if you log in
Mm-hmm.
and you log in and you set the value to test, if I
Okay.
open, how do I know if I open another component if the
Mm-hmm.
person is logged in?
Mm-hmm. No, the data won't be available in the other component unless you pass it, or unless you make it as a parent component and share it in between and among those components.
And that's preferred instead of using a cookie, for example?
If you use that cookie, that should be available for that entire, that should be available in any component.
Right, but which is preferred in React?
That depends. If you want to manage the data in the component and it is useful only in that component, you don't need to make it in the cookie. But the cookie is something like you want to persist some data, and when you come back to there again, maybe you can close that browser and come back to that. If you want to see that data, in those kind of scenarios, the cookies would be useful. And if you want to transfer the data between, client and server, then those kind of scenarios it would be useful. But I don't prefer to save the data in the cookies, especially if the data is some kind of, confidential kind of stuff. But it's better to keep, make the simple components independent, so that those can be reused and would be easier to development and would be easier to manage.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Where can I find the first recording?
I believe Matt should have shared with you. If not, can you please send out a mail to me and also Matt, so that we can share the link with you.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I believe he should have shared that already. But if not, then I will ensure that he's going to share that with all of you guys.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions, guys? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks for attending. And probably I would be going to design some more sessions in the coming weeks and update you. Thank you. Thanks for attending. And if you guys share the feedback, would be more helpful for us. Thank you.